You are looking at the exact moment the American justice system stopped pretending it cares about the safety of women. When a United States senator has to explain basic human biology and the concept of physical danger to a federal judge sitting before a confirmation committee, the political theater ends and a much darker reality begins to set in. What you just witnessed in that exchange wasn't a standard policy disagreement or a debate over obscure legal precedent. It was a devastating collision between extreme ideological delusion and the horrifying reality of a violent predator. Senator Ted Cruz did not just ask a question, he laid an inescapable trap, using the judge's own written opinions, her own spoken words, and the indisputable documented history of a repeat offender who shattered the lives of a 9-year-old boy and a 17-year-old girl. The tension in that room was not manufactured for the cameras. It was the palpable, heavy silence of an entire committee realizing that the nominee sitting before them had elevated radical academic theory above the fundamental human rights of vulnerable female inmates. To understand the sheer magnitude of what Cruz exposed, you have to look at the calculated way he built this interrogation. He didn't start by yelling. He started by establishing an indisputable baseline of facts. He forced the nominee to verbally acknowledge the crimes: a 9-year-old boy, a 17-year-old girl, subsequent violations involving the possession and distribution of abhorrent images depicting the violent abuse of children. By making the judge confirm these horrors out loud, Cruz stripped away any possibility of minimizing the threat this individual posed. He painted a vivid, disturbing picture of a 6'2" biological male, a serial predator whose entire criminal history was defined by the brutalization of the innocent. And then he dropped the anvil. He confronted her with the reality that this specific predator, armed with a fully intact male anatomy, requested a transfer to a female penitentiary, and she accommodated that request. The psychological pressure applied here is masterful. Cruz is not merely questioning her legal judgment, he is prosecuting her moral compass on live television. When the judge attempts to retreat into the standard, rehearsed talking points of a Washington confirmation hearing, claiming she simply applied the law to the facts, Cruz dismantles the shield instantly. He points out the glaring contradiction that shatters her entire defense. The Bureau of Prisons, the very institution responsible for maintaining order and security within the federal penitentiary system, had explicitly warned against this transfer. They filed formal objections. They cited a compelling penological interest in protecting female prisoners from sexual violence and trauma. They told the court in no uncertain terms that placing a 6'2" serial rapist into a population of incarcerated women was a recipe for disaster. Yet, as Cruz systematically read her own ruling back to her, the depth of the ideological capture became terrifyingly clear. She had dismissed the Bureau of Prisons' urgent warnings as a merely theoretical risk. She wrote that the record was devoid of evidence showing the petitioner was at risk of reoffending while incarcerated. Think about the sheer absurdity of that rationale. A repeat serial child rapist is suddenly deemed non-threatening simply because he is now surrounded by a new pool of potential victims. Cruz's incredulity in this moment is the voice of every rational citizen watching. He demands to know in what universe a serial repeat child rapist is not considered a risk. It is a rhetorical strike that leaves no room for evasion, highlighting a judicial philosophy so disconnected from human nature that it borders on the surreal. Notice how the nominee attempts to handle the pressure. Her voice remains measured, attempting to project the impartial dignity expected of a federal judge. But her answers reveal a desperate scramble to find cover behind procedural language. She insists she considered all the evidence, including statements from wardens. But Cruz refuses to let her hide in the bureaucratic weeds. He relentlessly yanks the conversation back to the most glaring, uncomfortable truth of the entire proceeding: the rights of the women locked inside that prison. Do they have the right not to be housed with a massive, biologically male repeat rapist? It is a binary question that demands a binary answer, yes or no. But a direct answer is political poison for the nominee. To say yes is to admit her ruling was profoundly flawed and endangered women. To say no is to publicly declare that the safety of female inmates is subordinate to the gender identity claims of a violent male predator. This is the exact point where the facade of impartial jurisprudence crumbles, revealing the political activism operating beneath the robes. Cruz expertly highlights the language used in the judge's order, pointing out the use of phrases like assigned a gender at birth. He rightfully mocks this terminology, noting that it sounds less like a binding legal document and more like a manifesto drafted in a disconnected college faculty lounge. By attacking the very vocabulary of the ruling, Cruz exposes the ideological framework dictating the outcome. This wasn't a decision based on established law or constitutional precedent. It was a decision reverse-engineered to satisfy a modern political orthodoxy, regardless of the human cost. The exposure of this hypocrisy is what makes the exchange so incredibly damaging. The left frequently champions the rights of women, the protection of the vulnerable, and the necessity of safe spaces. Yet here is a nominee, elevated by a progressive administration, actively working to place a convicted rapist into the most vulnerable population of women imaginable. Incarcerated females who cannot lock their doors, who cannot walk away, and who are entirely dependent on the state for their physical security. Cruz corners her with this undeniable contradiction. He makes it agonizingly clear that her definition of justice requires the subjugation of biological women to the desires of a biological male, who has already proven his capacity for extreme violence. As the seconds tick by, the silence from the Democratic side of the committee becomes deafening. Where are the fierce defenders of women's rights? Where is the outrage over the potential trauma inflicted on female inmates? They are paralyzed because defending this nominee means defending the indefensible. It means openly admitting that the safety of women is a secondary concern when it conflicts with the demands of extreme gender ideology. Cruz's relentless questioning exposes not just the nominee, but the entire political machine that placed her in that chair. He demonstrates that this is not an isolated error in judgment, but a feature of a rapidly shifting judicial system where reality is optional and ideology is mandatory. The most chilling aspect of this entire showdown is the realization of what happens after the cameras turn off. The senators will eventually move on to the next nominee, the news cycle will churn, and the political theater will find a new stage. But the women in that federal prison do not get to change the channel. They are trapped in the reality that this judge created. They are the ones who have to sleep with one eye open, knowing that the system designed to protect them has actively chosen to prioritize the comfort of a predator over their physical safety. Cruz's interrogation forces the committee and the country to look directly at the real-world consequences of treating biological reality as a social construct. Every time the judge attempts to deploy a sterilized, legalistic defense, Cruz counters with brutal, unfiltered reality. You said this individual was sober and entirely a female. Did this individual have male genitalia? The judge is forced to admit, yes. It is a devastating sequence. She tries to correct herself, claiming she meant hormonally a female, but the damage is already done. The absurdity of the situation is laid bare for everyone to see. A man who committed unspeakable crimes against children, retaining his male anatomy, is granted access to a women's prison because a judge decided his hormonal status negated his history of violence and his biological reality. This exchange is a masterclass in holding the powerful accountable. It strips away the complex legal jargon and forces a reckoning with basic morality. It demands that those seeking lifetime appointments to the federal bench explain why their political theories should supersede the safety of the citizens they are sworn to serve. Senator Cruz didn't just win a debate. He successfully indicted an entire worldview. He showed the American public exactly what happens when common sense is exiled from the courtroom and replaced by radical activism. The refusal to acknowledge the physical advantage of a 6'2" male, the dismissal of the Bureau of Prisons' explicit warnings, the blatant disregard for the trauma of female inmates, all of it forms a terrifying portrait of a justice system losing its grip on reality. In the end, the nominee's inability to give a straight answer about the rights of the female prisoners is the only answer that matters. It is a silent confession that under her judicial philosophy, those women simply do not count. They are acceptable collateral damage in the pursuit of ideological purity. This is why the confrontation resonates so deeply. It taps into a primal sense of injustice, the fundamental understanding that the strong should not be permitted to prey upon the weak, and that the state has a moral obligation to protect those in its custody. By dragging this hidden reality into the harsh light of a Senate hearing, Ted Cruz provided a stark warning about the future of American jurisprudence. The gavel may eventually fall to end the session, but the questions raised in that room will continue to echo, demanding an answer from a system that seems increasingly determined to look the other way.